Today, we will be examining Akkadian and Old Aramaic. We're going to do a language comparison between these two cousin languages. These are both Semitic languages from the ancient world, the ancient Middle East, from Mesopotamia, all the way over into the Levant. Basically, these are the major languages across the Fertile Crescent. And because Akkadian and Aramaic more generally are so close and share a lot of overlap through the years, I'm going to go piece by piece with the different dialects. So today we'll be looking at Akkadian versus Old Aramaic. And just to get us started, for those of you who are not familiar with these languages or their systems, I'm using an older style of font for Aramaic here because when Old Aramaic is written, it's written in a font that people may call Phoenician, right? But it's basically an early Semitic alphabet. It's alphabetic. And in fact, this alphabet is closer to how we read the Latin characters we use for English than later iterations of Aramaic. And in fact, they get more abstract and difficult to read. But you can look at the first and last letters of the teal green on the left that just says Aramaya. And the first and last letters are basically like our letter A in Latin or English. And in fact, if you are going from right to left, go ahead and look at the letter that looks like it's in the middle of the screen in teal, that A sound, it's called Aleph. You go just to the left of that, that's an R. It's not too different shaped from the way we make an R. We just have a little tail underneath that notch. And of course, this one's backwards. Maybe it looks a little bit like the Greek rho. And next to it is a mim or an M. So you can kind of see an M there, right? So the older that the writing is, the easier it is to read. Now, when we're talking about Akkadian, if you look at the light blue on the right, this is in cuneiform. It means when we take a stylus or a wedge-shaped tool, almost like a chisel, but not so big, right? Just a wedge-shaped tool, and you impress it into clay, you get these little triangles. And through these triangles, you can design different shapes, and that's how we write Akkadian. So just to start off with, the writing systems are very different, but the languages are pretty similar. And today, I'm going to be looking at a specific inscription from Tel Fekheriyeh in Syria, not too far from Tel Khalaf. And this place has an inscription that's in both Akkadian and Aramaic. This is the oldest attested Aramaic inscription, actually. So I'm just going to look at a couple lines and point out some commonalities between the two languages. So my Aramaic is going to be in white. My Akkadian will be in blue or light blue. And let's go ahead and read Qadam Hadad Sakan. That's the Aramaic. And now the Akkadian, Ana Adad. So we notice here a couple things. The Akkadian just means two, and it's to the deity Hadad. And the Aramaic is Qadam, before. Actually, the Aramaic has a whole sentence, kind of, or at least a clause, prefacing, Hadad Sikan or Hadad of Sikan, whereas the Akkadian just begins, with the to Hadad, right? Like it's maybe a votive image or something like that. It's done on behalf of Hadad. And when we look at Hadad, we see it in Aramaic with an H or a hey, as the letter's called, on the front. And we don't see that with Akkadian. Well, there's a reason for that. The regular letter hey or H doesn't exist in the Sumerian writing system, and so it doesn't show up in Akkadian writing. There's ways we can infer it, kind of the way they use vowels sometimes in the Akkadian writing, but we don't actually have it written out. So you get this Adad in the Akkadian style instead of Hadad. Let's go ahead and read line 2. And by the way the lines are calibrated here, I'm calibrating them according to the Aramaic. The Akkadian lining is a little different, and so It may be a little longer, a little shorter, and rather than confuse anyone, I just want to focus on the language rather than the inscription itself. The inscription for us is just a vehicle to explore Akkadian and Aramaic, and it's a way of doing it without me translating anything, right? Like I'm not making an Akkadian translation of an Aramaic proverb or something like that, or vice versa, which I could do, but this already exists. I mean, it's almost 3,000 years old. And so, like, it's a better precedent than anything we could generate here because there's going to be biases and maybe an attention to how similar things are. So, I'm going to go ahead and read the Aramaic first in white. Gugal Shemayin wa Arak min Nahath Ashar Unatin Ra'i, or Ra'ya perhaps. And now the Akkadian. Gugal Shameye u Arseti Mushaznin Nukhshi Nadin Riti. And okay, this is going to translate something like the director of waterways of heaven and earth who brings down riches and gives pleasure. So it's a title for Hadad, right? Who's Hadad? I should have mentioned it earlier. He's the storm god, right? So Hadad controls basically how much water rains, flows on crops, and things like that. So to begin, we actually don't begin with a word that's either Aramaic or Akkadian. It's a Sumerian word, Gugal, and it probably refers to the person who's in charge of a waterway. I'm calling it a waterway. You know, some traditional translations will say the canal inspector. If you ever read the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, it's going to list this word as the canal inspector. It seems to me that, you know, this is about like who controls how much water flows, right? It's used in irrigation language, right? So this is a title of a person. It's a person's job. And remember, civilization develops in Mesopotamia because of the ability to irrigate. And it forms around these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And so when people start growing their own food, they need to continue to increase the abundance of what they can yield in the growing periods. And they'll do that by funneling the water from the rivers into irritable land. And so, you know, this is like civilization starts through this process. So naturally, there's a title for someone who controls the water. And it's basically someone who's a water controller, you know. And I don't know if there's a better title out there. I mean, there's probably professionals. You know, you work for your state, you know, or county, and you control the waterways, or you know people who do. Let me know what the better title is. So I'm translating as the director of the waterways of using it in the construct of what? Well, let's start with heaven. So Aramaic Shemayin, this is a plural, kind of like the Hebrew. Same with Akkadian. Akkadian's a plural too, but you don't have a nun, or like in Hebrew, Shemayim, you don't have a nun or a mim on the end. There's probably, you know, we could call this Shamei or Shameyi. I lean toward, you know, a Shameyi based on how different vowels, when they're pressed next to each other, tend to be vocalized in Akkadian. But there could be some discussion on that. It also pairs well with, you know, other forms of Aramaic. And so it's probably the case. Remember, when we're reading Akkadian here, I'm not reading out the cuneiform. I'm reading the normalized transliteration. And so, you know, we can get access. I could have posted the transliteration here. Transliteration is where we take the cuneiform tablets and then we code it according to how the Akkadian signs should be represented in Latin script. From there, you normalize it, and through the normalization, you get sort of how the language, you know, is going to flow. And again, I'm just comparing languages here. I'm not doing an inscriptional analysis or anything. But you can see these are very similar words, and you know, not too different from Arabic either. I mean, you see a shin to sin shift in Arabic. And then we have the word and earth. So the one who controls the waterways of heaven and earth. This is a title we're giving Hadad. Now, I included below a couple of things from the Hebrew Bible. And there's an Aramaic sentence in the book of Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 10:11, where the word arqa is used. And the other is ar'a, which is the more common version of it. But one version of it uses a qaf instead of an ain. And if you compare that with Hebrew, Hebrew's Eretz, right? So you look at Akkadian, Akkadian's pairing a little better with Hebrew here. And the Aramaic, of course, pairs with the Aramaic found in Jeremiah. So it's interesting that the Jeremiah version is at least reflecting the usage from the most ancient Aramaic inscription we have. Then we have the word to give, Natan in Hebrew. Did I say Hebrew? Natan in Aramaic here, which we know from Hebrew, Natan. And in Akkadian, you have Nadin, right? Which is basically the same, except the dental is a D instead of a Tav or a Tau, which is just our T. This idea of pastures or pasture land, this is land that could be grazed upon. In fact, people may know a raya is a shepherd in Aramaic if you've ever studied it. So let's go ahead and read line 3, first in the Aramaic on top in the white. Umashkiya lamat kulen unaten shela wadakur. Now the Akkadian in the light blue below. Umashkite ananishi kaldadme nadin ishku unindabei, which is something like, and watering places to the entire country, and gives the offering basket and the libation vessel in the Aramaic, similar in the Akkadian below, and watering places to the people of all the lands, giving the libation vessel and food offerings. So it's switched up there. Shkaya is the root to water or to provide water to something, right? You can water plants, you can water horses, right? Give water to horses and things. And that root is productive in both Aramaic and Akkadian. Of course, I also highlighted the conjunction and in both of those, which would just be the vav or waw in Aramaic, and in Akkadian below it's u. Then we have something pretty interesting here. We have lamat kulein. So to every village, town, or country, so maybe the entire country is a better way of putting it, compared to the Akkadian below, Ananishi Kaldadme, to the people of all the lands. And so there's been some discussion on what MT in the Aramaic is, Mim Tav. What is that? Well, is it person, a mut? Is it land, a mat? Like a matha, right? If you speak Neo-Aramaic. So the issue is, if it's people, like Nishi, it's a feminine plural in Akkadian. So we get this feminine kulein following it if it's people, but we also get that if it's a matha. So that doesn't really help us when we see the feminine kulein following mat. So let's assume that it means the entire country. It could mean all the people as well, or, every person. Maybe that's the way to think of it. If, it's trying to approximate Nishi, and if the word order has anything to do with that, it just makes you wonder, what it is specifically. Then again, Nadine and Natan. So now let's go ahead and look at line 4. I'm going to read the Aramaic in white on top first. Lela hin kulum ahwahu, Google nahar kulam ma'adan. And now the Akkadian below. An ili acheshu Google narati muttaqidu. And that's going to translate to something like, to all the gods, his brothers, the director of waterways, of all the rivers, the one who provides, right? So again, I chose director of waterways instead of canal inspector, because we're talking about rivers here, like not just canals, right? So a waterway might be a better choice, at least in my head. The word for God is basically the same here. Alahin versus Eli. There is, technically these are different, right? Whenever there's the hey in it, it's not the same as Il, as you'd see as another word for God in the Levant, in the West. So they're similar, but not the same. Maybe I should have colored it a little differently than that. But they both mean the gods. And then his brothers, ahwohu versus acheshu. So they're basically the same here. The way the plural is done in Akkadian, it doubles the chet, and the possessive suffix for his is different between Aramaic and Akkadian. It's hu versus shu. That's a phonological shift that's not uncommon. It happens in other languages too. But here it's noteworthy to say it's the same but different. And if you understand why it's different, then you know it's the same. If you don't understand why it's different, then it's just different. Nahar is a river in Aramaic, and then you have Narati for rivers in Akkadian. And so again, remember earlier when I showed you that there is no way to write H. So in Hadad, we didn't have an H, a normal hey, that is to say, in Akkadian. So when we look at river here, we just put a macron, that's the bar over the A in Narati, over the first A to let us know, okay, this is etymologically related to Nahar, right? And so that being the case, we just don't see the hey or the H in Akkadian anywhere because there's no way to write it, but it is the same word. All right, let's finish off with the first part of verse 5. Mathkulen ila Rahman, and now the Akkadian below in blue. Kibrati ilu remenuyu, or remenuu. And that's going to translate to the whole country with pleasant things, the compassionate God. So again, ilu versus elo here. Elo, this is a long A I'm making, not an O, not elo, but elo, as opposed to elah with a short A. And the reason for that, of course, is in Aramaic, you have a long A in this place, what's called a scofo or scapa. And then you have it followed by this word Rahman. God is considered the compassionate. Allah Rahman is an old, this goes back 3,000 years, basically 2,900 years ago, 900 BC approximately, something like that. And it's just, one of the ways in which the societies in the Middle East would speak about God, as being compassionate. And the God being spoken of here, it's not like the word we're using in English or Aramaic, Arabic, Hebrew, whatever. It's referring to Hadad. And so this is an epithet being used of the storm god just to denote that he is compassionate, okay? It's not necessarily a title that only belongs to Hadad. It's just a nice thing to say about the deity, and here the deity is Hadad. So, through this little exploration, you can see how Akkadian and Aramaic, or Old Aramaic, are very similar to one another. Now, they're not the same, but they're similar, and they're cousin languages. And if you've ever studied one, it's not too much of a jump to learn the other. The hard part is in the writing system. So the hard part is when it's cuneiform. Really, the alphabetic Aramaic is pretty easy. Maybe it'll take you a day to learn, right? Just sit down and learn it. It's very, like I said, it's close to Latin, right? So in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video and you like the language comparison series. Please do all the algorithmic duties. If you've liked it, like, share, subscribe, and make sure to comment and share the video if you found it beneficial in any way. Thank you very much for watching.